Why don't you share the anecdote around how we initially rolled out our Power BI dashboards and
Sure.
our federated approach that failed miserably.
Yes, it did. Yeah, I mean, this stuff is really hard. We had to learn how to do things, right? So Power BI is a dashboarding system. It basically allows you to have this live interactive spreadsheet with graphs and visualizations. Most people have probably interacted with it to some degree, but if you haven't, that's what it is. And in many ways, it's a replacement to a spreadsheet, right? And we have today, right, in most companies, one of the most wonderful things about Excel and spreadsheets is that they are very user-friendly, they're intuitive, anyone can start from scratch and start building these things. So that's the very definition of a federated approach. You could have 50 different people all building their own spreadsheets. That's both a positive and a negative. At the beginning, we had 50 different spreadsheets for occupancy, right? That's not good. But by the same token, people felt like it was democratic. I can go take my data from, say, Yardi or some other system, and I can start to do my own calculations. This was really about, I joke, we went on a spreadsheet extermination campaign, right? You had to take people's precious, precious, precious spreadsheets away from them and tell them, we're going to now do this all in one place. There's not going to be 7 spreadsheets for this one different metric. We're going to have one dashboard that does this metric. And by the way, it's going to allow you to look at that metric in a million different ways that you never could have done on the spreadsheet.
I bet that was hard.
That is really hard, and I would say for over a year, maybe even still today, we have shadow technology out there, right? Where people instinctively, they just want to go and solve the problem themselves. This is really about building a culture around that. One of the ways we tried to get over that problem was we said, okay, since spreadsheets are very democratic and very federated, we'll allow each team to develop their own dashboards. Right?
Using the same data source that we've curated and qualified and everyone trusts and love. And so we thought, what's the harm in this? This seems like a great idea.
That was the idea, since we're all going to use the source of truth, and since the platform does calculate certain things, we'll just make it easy for everyone to do what they want to do. We were, I would say, safe to say, maybe you, others warned us that this was not altogether the safest approach.
A little skeptical?
A little skeptical. I've seen that get out of control quickly.
Yes, well, and to that point, it got out of control quickly, right? And what we realized was that we were wasting money, and dashboards, particularly when they require engineering on the data platform, some of them do require that, they can be quite expensive. They can be $100,000 to create if you're not careful. And what we realized was we were starting to create, at best, we were creating duplicative dashboards where one team and another team were basically starting to do the same thing, and we discovered duplicative dashboards. We also very quickly ended up in a place where we didn't even know what dashboards we had, right? And so I would say, some of these things we had to learn many times over. This one we learned pretty quickly, and within 6 months or so we all said this is not working the right way. We're going to create a centralized team, a centralized resource to create these for us. And that is just a quantum leap for people, right? No one has to wait in a queue to create a spreadsheet.
Right.
In this case, in some cases, they had to wait in a queue to get their dashboard. It was very, very important that we resource that team appropriately and have senior management chime in on what the prioritization of their work was. So you want to have enough people on there that you can do a lot of work quickly, because if people are waiting, back comes the shadow tech, right? And then we want to make sure that we knew, even if we had a lot of people, it was going to be a finite resource. We had to make sure we were prioritizing that work correctly. In that process, we created what we refer to as our enterprise reporting library. It's a list of now, I think, 20 to 30 dashboards that we have that are now listed on the intranet that everyone knows exist, knows what they can do. They're all described on the intranet. So if you want to know historical leasing data, there is one spreadsheet you're going to. There's one dashboard. See, it's hard for me to give up spreadsheets. There's one dashboard that you're going to, not somebody else's spreadsheet or somebody else's dashboard. There's one place. So it's not just a single source of truth on data, it's a single source of truth on reporting. You're trying to really create both of those things.
What we also found when we tried to federate the dashboard creation and management, to kind of put it in the hands of the people, is that became the individuals felt like their value was to create the world's most coolest dashboard ever, and we didn't want people spending time on that. We wanted people spending time on understanding the data so that they could run their business, not creating the views to this. And it became almost like a nuclear arms race between different business units, and everyone. Then you can imagine jobs were being repurposed to be creating dashboards. There's the open recs are needing more employees to do this. We're like, wait, this is really going in the wrong direction. And so, to Matt's point, we centralized it. We put some structure around work intake and demand management. And as a result, what we found is there was an inflection point for once we got enough of the information exposed in the dashboards in a structured way, the demand fell off a lot because they needed to get over the first hump, right?
Right.
Once you have your leasing pipeline information, your financial information, the majority of the company can run. And then at that point, it's sort of outlier use cases coming in that we could prioritize piecemeal depending on what the track was.
You're never done building dashboards, but you're done building the most critical ones.
Yeah.
And I think that was a key success indicator. At the beginning, this centralized enterprise reporting team that did these dashboards, they were the most popular kids in town, and there were real fights about who's going to get what and when. A success indicator was when those fights dropped off. We used to have, I think, even a weekly meeting to talk about that prioritization. That moved from a weekly to a monthly. Now it's just a quarterly report that comes out and we all take a look at it. I think the volume has gone down, and I think also, building dashboards is a thing. When you're first starting to build these, you're going to get them wrong a lot. And it's not just like building an Excel spreadsheet. I think really understanding how to present and communicate data is really important. At the beginning, to your point, we had people creating dashboards just because they could create cool looking dashboards. And what we realized very early on was don't create a dashboard unless you can make a list of the 5 or 10 questions you are trying to answer. And I would say that, if you adopt an insights-driven strategy like us, I think a lot of that strategy, a lot of the tactics around the strategy really come down to what questions, really driving all the time towards that. What questions are we trying to answer and in what order and to what end, right? So everything revolves around these questions. And then of course, designing them in a way that any normal person can actually use them even if they weren't the one who designed them themselves.
The amount of times I've heard Matt ask the question, rightly so, when we're reviewing sort of a problem to solve or a dashboard process request, he's like, oh, just stop. What question are you trying to answer before we go any further?
Yeah.
And it's amazing how convoluted an idea can get without actually understanding what question they're trying to answer. But once you ask that, they pause and okay, let's think this through, and then it becomes a very simple, in many cases, a simple task to answer it.
You can start a data-driven process for an end of creating more efficiency. That's really not what our purpose was. Our purpose was really about providing insights. And if you're going to go down that road and you're looking for that very first step, I think to kind of create a sense of interest and curiosity and intrigue in a senior management team, it's starting with the question, what questions would we like to be able to answer as a business? Right. Can we come up with the 30 questions? If we can answer those questions really well, we will have a competitive advantage versus our peers. That's really the perspective that we took. It wasn't at the very beginning. We started, like I said, in this very organic, trying to do very simple things. But as the strategy evolved, that's what we keep coming back to over and over again. It's our kind of North Star from a data perspective is what are the 30 questions we're trying to answer as a company?
And now what we do with dashboards is we almost use them as a prototyping tool to answer questions in a lightweight design kind of way with the real data to maybe inform whether it could become an application someday or a request to enhance an existing application, which obviously takes a little bit more lift in engineering to get that done. I think that's been pretty effective for prototyping business plans and other various requests that have come through, and without kind of boiling the ocean, we can get something stood up quickly, get a reaction, iterate on it. And sometimes, actually in many cases, it actually just stays in that format because it's good enough. And sometimes it does traverse into something more complex or long-term, but it's been a really, really powerful tool. The only other thing I'd mention around data consumption, we talked about the applications and sharing data externally, we talked about dashboards, is a product called Looker from Google. So we had, very quickly, we became aware of a need from our business to, the power of Excel, again, only to 1 million rows, but outside of that, we had users in our business, power users, who were high volume data consumers and modelers. And you couldn't really get the information into Excel in a way that would work well for them. Dashboards are not good for that at all.
Right.
And so we went to market and looked at a few different tools to do that. It's a little bit of a niche play, but it was a really important problem to solve because it became sort of a reason why we were going in the wrong direction overall with this data strategy. And I need my Excel back. We're like, no, you don't. Actually, let me give you a tool that operates like Excel, but it connects directly to the linked data platform, and you can manipulate this in real time, look at it in real time, and do your own insights. So it's not through a one-dimensional dashboard, it becomes a couple of dimensions that you can actually manage directly. And that went from 0 to about 100 users in about 6 months, because there's this insatiable appetite to still manage their data and wrangle it. They want to be able to wrangle it. And we were cool with that as long as you're using the approved data. Right? That's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, because if they're forced back into Excel, they don't have that real-time connection. Our accountants, and accountants oftentimes need, close to real-time data. in terms of what they do with their day-to-day job, and we have a large number of them now on Looker. The reality is we as a firm, we had a good demand from the business for Looker and for the platform because we were simply outgrowing Excel. We had these spreadsheets, not only did we have a bunch of them all operating differently, but they were huge and cumbersome and latent, and they would crash. And I think we kind of leveraged that a little bit to say there is a better way, right? We can give you a dashboard instead of you having to refresh that, copy, paste all the data over and over and over again just to get to easy answers to questions.